and welcome to Friday Finds with Rob Meyer-Kukan.
Hello, and thank you once again for joining me for Friday Finds. My name is Rob Meyer-Kukan of the Healthy Musician Institute in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I thank you for joining me for this exciting first ever Handbell Composer Con. I'm not too much into comic books, but I know that Comic-Con is kind of a big thing. And when I thought about the idea of getting some composers together, I thought, well, let's make this kind of like a panel discussion that happens at those comic book conventions, and we'll call it ComposerCon. So I am pleased to have on the line with me today Catherine McMichael from Saginaw, Michigan. We have Sandy Ethan from New London, Wisconsin, and we have Matt Compton from Vancouver, Washington. Hello, everyone. How are you today?
Hello.
Fine, thanks.
Good. Great.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to get started today by giving everyone a little bit of a chance to give a bit of an introduction to yourself, a little more than just the brief intro I gave of you telling you people where you're from. So Matt, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and let us get to know you just a little bit.
Yeah. Matt Compton, and I live currently in Vancouver, Washington, which is just on the other side of the river from Portland, Oregon. And so I direct Bells of the Cascades in Portland. And then I'm also director of music ministries at a Methodist church here in Vancouver. And I direct the adult bell choir, the children's handbell choir that I started earlier this year, the adult choir, and then the praise team.
Excellent. Wonderful. And Sandy, could you give us a little bit more info about yourself?
Sure. I've been doing Director of Music Ministry at First Congregational United Church of Christ here in New London since 1992. I play the organ. I'm also the keyboard accompanist for the choir. I direct Spirit Bells, which is our adult handbell choir. I direct Heavenly Metal, which is our 7th through 12th grade handbell choir. And I also do a group called the Ring Along Choir, which is intergenerational for people who are non-music readers. And it's sort of the idea of the Artist Freeman books, where you ring along when things are circled, and they play with hymns several times a month, and it's a really great way to engage seniors and young children and the like, and it's been very successful. And I also direct the handbell ensemble at Silver Lake College in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, which is a small liberal arts school, and I've been doing that for 9 years now. So
Excellent. What do you do in your free time?
No.
Awesome.
I'm a grandmother. That tells you. My grandchildren.
Awesome. And last but not least, Catherine McMichael, will you give us a little bit of your background as well?
I will. I love that name, Heavenly Metal. I think that's just great. I love it. I am a pianist, and I play piano with the Saginaw Symphony with a ragtime orchestra. I direct a small 13-piece theater orchestra, and then I have my handbell choir, which is at the First United Methodist Church. I teach students. I write a lot of music, not just for handbells. I write for orchestras and choirs and saxophones and bands and chamber ensembles of all types. And I'm married to a violinist, and my son is a violin major, and my daughter plays ukulele and guitar. So we do a lot of family concerts. I have 5 publishers, and for different strings and band and bells and blah, blah, blah. So lots of variety. I mean, handbells is an important part of what I do, but just one part.
Excellent. Very cool. So we'll stick with you, Catherine. Tell us a little bit, how did you get involved in composing for handbell music? Did you study composition? You said you compose for other instruments and you do some other composing. How did that morph into handbell composing?
I am completely self-taught, compositionally speaking, and I started out writing for my husband's violin students to play with my piano students. And so I've always been kind of a composer of need. Okay, well, we need this, so it isn't there, so can you make it happen? And that's kind of what what occurred with handbells. I've been directing my handbell choir now for about 18 years. And I started writing for them because we needed stuff that we didn't have. And when I did a kid bell hand choir for quite a while, there was nothing out there for kids that suited us. I mean, we had about 8 or 9 kids, and it was like a one-room schoolhouse. And my son, for example, could play the entire bass clef, and then other kids could barely, pick up the right bell. So you're writing stuff that works for your group. And most of the stuff that I've encountered for kid bells or like level 1, level 2 is it's too long, it's too boring, it's just not quite right. And so you write for your group, and I've always had a lot of fun with that and enjoy it. And that's kind of how it started for handbells. And then of course I did the same for my adult bell choir too. If there's something that we need or want that isn't out there or isn't out there quite the way we want it, I do it. And then you get requests and commissions and so forth. So it's been by task rather than by inspiration, although it's inspiring to do it. But I think of George M. Cohan's famous quote. He says, the most inspiring thing is a phone call from my agent. And that's kind of how it works for me. I like to fill a need, and that's where the writing has come in.
Oh, very cool. So Sandy, how did you get involved in composing handbell music?
Well, I was a flute and keyboard major in college, and I started dabbling in writing for flute, and I really enjoyed that. And some of the things I started writing, some of my fellow students were getting married one of the years I was in school, and they said, can we please use this music at our wedding? And I just thought that was really cool. And years passed, and I ended up moving up here to New London, and when I got to this church, they had handbells, and their director was killed in a car crash, and I had never done handbells before. So I did a workshop with Bill Alexander, and I knew I would have to do this for the rest of my life because I was hooked immediately. And we just didn't have a huge budget for music. So I just, like Catherine, you're filling a need, and you see the spectrum of musicianship in a volunteer group at a church can be huge and daunting. And to keep everyone engaged, the people who really struggle, you don't want them curled up in the corner in the fetal position and leaving the first rehearsal, but the people that are need a little bit of a challenge, you don't want them to be bored, and therein lies the challenge. How do I keep all of these people engaged and still have something that's musical? And I agree also with her that my first findings in a lot of level 1 music, to me, meh, as my kids would say in college. I don't know. I didn't find it engaging. Some of it reminded me of calliope music, and I thought some of it was a little bit condescending to adult beginners. So I started to write on some classical themes and some folk music. The training I had at Silver Lake College working on a Kodai degree really helped me. Solfege, learning advanced solfege from Sister Lorna Zemke, who was a student of Zoltan Kodai, was an enormous help to me. It just opened up so many doors in my mind and in my writing. So that was very helpful. So, and I also, like Matt, I attended Concordia in Mequon, Wisconsin during the summer handbell program that they have there. And I got to work with Arnold Sherman, John Banke, and Kay Cook and people like that around the year 1999, 2000 in there. And that also, launched me into doing a lot more writing as well. So.
Awesome. Well, that opens the door then for you, Matt. Tell us how you got involved in composing for handbell music.
So when I was in 7th grade, my grandma, she'd asked me if I wanted to join her bell choir while my dad was deployed to Kuwait. She wanted to use bells she wanted to find something that could be a distraction, essentially, while my dad was deployed. And so she was like, well, you can join my bell choir. And then my mom was like, well, if you join, you can't just do it for a week. You have to commit to it for at least a year. Well, it's been a very long year. But actually about a year into it, after playing for about a year, I was like, I want to do that. And so I just started throwing some notes on a piece of paper without knowing a single thing. And then I was like, here, Kevin McChesney, who lives 15 minutes from my house, would you be willing to take a look at this piece of music? And he very gently told me that I need a lot of work. And from there, I just kept writing, and I wound up finding a single chord progression that I fell in love with and used it for just about everything for a while. And then Kevin started actually taking me under his wing. So for about a year and a half, 2 years, I took some lessons with Kevin with composing. And then I went to Concordia, Wisconsin, as Sandy said, and then studied composition more there and just really developed composition for handbells mostly. But then while I was at Concordia, I started to focus on branching out at least a little bit beyond the bell world. But one of my professors at Concordia, Dr. Dudley, she always jokingly says, every time I hand her a choral piece, she's like, great, you wrote me a bell piece with words. So I'm still working a little bit on getting out of the handbell BDM a little bit, but mostly still, it's obviously my focus.
Cool, excellent. Well, each of you have spoken a little bit about how you got started with bells, and there was kind of a little bit of a theme of we needed stuff. So the next question I want to ask each of you is to tell me about your compositional process. So how is it that you go about starting from beginning nothing to end result? Without, of course, giving us all 180 however many measures in each song. But are you solely inspired by commissions? Do you work just on ideas that you've had ruminating in your minds? Are they always only ever based on hymn tunes or other things like that? Where does the compositional process start for you? And let's go back to Catherine again to give us a start there.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about Odyssey, which was the Don Alyared commission from Bayview. And that specific scholarship is for original music for handbells. It's not to be an adaptation or a hymn tune or anything else, because his mission in life really was to create a repertoire that specifically was idiomatic for a bell choir. And, you know, if you write for a lot of instruments like I do, the range can be the same. I mean, you can look at bell music and it looks like piano music, but it ain't the same. And so Don was very specific about writing for bells and making the most of the ensemble itself. And so for Odyssey, I started out by talking to Don and gave him a call, and we talked for about 45 minutes. Of course, we both love Bayview, and he loved the water and the boats and the, you know, just everything about Bayview and the breeze and the blue and everything like that. And just in the conversation, I knew that I wanted something that had sweep, that had a broad vista kind of feel to it, that used a lot of resonance, that used bells in the interesting percussive ways that are continually being added to our technical toolbox. And for me, that's often where it starts, is talking to the person that wants the piece, because you find common ground, things that are inspiring to both of you. And I don't know, I think there's a little bit of alchemy there where it turns into sound. Sometimes I'll say to someone who's commissioned a piece, I'll say, okay, so you walk out on stage, and what do you want to have happen? What do you want the audience to hear? What do you want to sound like? What is that sound? And just trying to create that aura or atmosphere, then you get to specifics. You know, is it going to be melodic? Is it going to be LD? You know, what are we going to do here? You know, and that's often where the process begins. And then you find I don't know how you do it. You find a theme, and it seems like the right one, and then you turn it into reality. I mean, it's kind of like your dream house, you know, and then all of a sudden you're buying lumber and nails. So you take that imagery and then turn it into something concrete on a page. There's an interesting mix of imagery and reality that go together to make that piece. And then practical practical things, like no matter how hard I try, I always seem to give my ringers something that's impossible to ring. I try and troubleshoot it, but bells that are hard to write for. And you mean you can't pick up 3 things at once and hit a mallet on your neighbor's bell? So there's, all of those factors are part of the process. But I would have to say initially, it's a conversation and finding what excites and inspires the person that wants the piece. And then you go from there and try and create that kind of cathedral of sound that you want to have happen.
Awesome.
That's it.
Very cool. Sandy, what about you? What's your compositional process?
Well, I agree with so much Catherine said. You have to soak up, a lot from, like, if it is a commission. I've had phone calls where they said, we just want people to say yeehaw in the church at the end of the song. So, right away, there's an imagery right there. I've actually had someone say that to me. And so I have a lot of little snippets of ideas in my computer, though, because I can be driving down the road or in the shower or cleaning my kitchen floor, and I'll just think of some little motive or some little tune that just keeps rattling around my brain, and I just have a library of them in my computer, and I always think someday that will fit somewhere. And all of a sudden, when you do get a commission, and maybe it is an arrangement of an existing hymn tune or pop piece or whatever, you realize that little thing is a wonderful counter melody or an introduction or some connecting tissue within the body of the piece that just became really useful. So I try not to throw little things like that away. I always think I'll remember them, and then I don't anymore because I'm getting that, older brain that's requiring ginkgo biloba or something. So I have to write. I write a lot of notes to myself in solfege syllables. They're on the back of bank slips in my car and things like that. So I keep little catalogs of that. But when it comes to original pieces, yes, she's right. You have to get a grasp of what the person that's commissioning and what are they envisioning for this, and for length and difficulty. The other thing is, sometimes you can get a homework assignment from a publishing house. They will call you or email you and say, we have a hole in our catalog and we would like a level 2 Christmas piece for 3 to 5 octaves that maybe includes some chimes. Well, already you've been given 5 parameters right there, right, that you can start to mess with. So sometimes it is given to you, but I also agree with Catherine. There's times you want to write for something and you think, oh, I would just love that ringer to be able to, pick up 2 chimes, mallet that, do a jumping jack and a squat thrust in between, because it's like there's so much we require of them. And so sometimes you have to decide what you're going to sacrifice for the musicality of the piece, or what, you think you might. Sometimes I footnote things in advanced music, and if I have an idea of how to do a bell assignment, to make it, sure, to have an ease of execution for whatever is required there. But yeah, I just get a lot of inspiration from things that I hear in my head. Does that sound bad? I hear those things in my head, and I just write them down. I hear bells in my head, yeah. But yeah, I think it's just a collection of, and a lot of it, and maybe because Catherine's also a pianist, is just from noodling around on the keyboard. Sometimes your hands will take you somewhere and you'll go, oh, that's really cool. I'm going to use that because that just works really well in this section. And I just mess around on the keyboard, and I've gotten a lot of inspiration that way as well.
So I want to add something to what Sandy just said, because it's so true. In some ways, the more limitations you have, the easier it is to do it, because you don't have limitless choice. And it's, for me anyway, it's easier to work in terms of, okay, what can't I have? I can have this and this and this, and I can't have that and that. And it helps focus your thinking over and out. I just want to confirm with that. That's very true.
Yes. Yes.
Well, how about you, Matt?
So, I have a intense habit of walking around whistling, humming, or whatever, but it's never just a tune that comes to my head. I never just have like ideas running in my head ever. It's very unusual. And so for me, it's literally I have to sit down and like be playing on the piano, like Sandy said, and that's usually where something starts for me. But then I'm also one of the faster composers because on average I'll get inspired by something and about 3 or 4 hours later I'm done with the piece.
Wow.
So when people commission me, which doesn't happen too frequently, but usually I can get a commission done in less than a week. And which, but a lot of the time I work really well under pressure too. So I'm glad when people give me a longer time because I usually won't finish it until the week before they need it because that's when I start writing it because that's when I get inspired usually. But my compositional process generally is hymn tunes because that's kind of, bells are a niche instrument for churches.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, it's what gets published more. And so that's kind of what I've done the most of, but I'm trying to get more original music out there because I think that's one thing that many groups kind of are afraid of is original pieces, especially within a church, because it's not a familiar tune. So I try to write music that is going to be a catchy melody so it sounds hymn-like or something that people will grasp onto. But within my compositional process, yeah, it's a lot of the time just kind of plunking around on the piano and if it is a commission, seeing what the people want. But yeah, for me, from start to finish, it's just a very quick process of, I have this idea, I don't want to lose it, and I also just want to get the piece done because I want to know what happens in the end. I'm a very quick reader, and I like to know what happens at the end very quickly, so I read very quickly. And so it kind of write in that similar style where I want to know what happens in the end too. And so I kind of like to do that. But then if it's like a hymn tune arrangement, it's a struggle nowadays to be a composer of what hymn hasn't been arranged 37 times already.
Right.
Like, do we really need another arrangement of Carol of the Bells or Amazing Grace? And every year there's another one. But I try to find hymn tunes that are under arranged or haven't been arranged. So for example, my Toccata on King's Weston arrangement that I did last year, that the only other arrangement of that hymn tune is Fred Grayman's Fantasy on King's Weston. And I love that tune, and a lot of the times what happens is I'll try to do something creative with it, and so the middle section, it has that retrograde melody where the melody is going backwards at the same time. And that was just total chance. It's like, what if? And it just worked out. And so I like to find creative things like that and find memorable ways to make the piece stand out. And then Sandy and Catherine both talked on, and your ringers can only do so much, but I'm under the mindset of what Arnold Sherman said a few years ago is you write it and the ringers figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the times, even though I do try and find that in some ways, that is true because you can find ways to get one ringer to do three things at one time. And it's usually just, hey, can you mallet this for me? And so I try not to limit myself too much in that way, but I do try and see if parts are going to be a little bit unnecessarily ridiculous. But yeah.
Very cool. So Matt, who has had the greatest influence on you as a composer, or what, if it's not a person, has had the greatest influence on you as a handbell composer?
I think what has been one of the biggest influences has been just in a lot of the catalogs, there isn't great music anymore. You get every once in a while a couple of huge hits, but there's a lot of music out there that is kind of chug and plug. Kind of like Sandy said, sometimes publishers need those pieces, and there are some composers that I've found that it's just you can tell. And so one of my inspirations is to create unique arrangements or compositions that stand out, create solid repertoire for the instrument, because there's just a lot of arrangements, and sometimes it's newer composers because they're just getting into it. But one of the things that's helped me was actually Kevin McChesney when I started. He sat down and worked with me on so much of this stuff, and he's like, you need better chord progressions. You have the same thing in every piece, like I was talking about. He's like, rhythmically you need this. and he really helped me kind of figure out the cycle. Dr. Benke at Concordia, that was a great resource to have right there, and he sat and worked with me on a lot of it. Well, my arrangement of Crown Him with Many Crowns that was done a few years ago, he massively changed it for the better, but there were so many changes to that arrangement, but it just made it so much better in the end. And so I think for me, one of my biggest influences and inspirations is to just create good, solid repertoire that a lot of times is missing.
All right. Excellent. Helping to bridge the gap and fill the void there. Awesome.
Yes.
Sandy, who has been your greatest influence, or what has had the greatest influence on you as a handbell composer, if it's not a specific person?
Well, I think we could all say that's probably ongoing, because
Yeah.
I'm not sure, was it Aaron Copland who said we write out of accumulation of everything we've ever heard? Something, I'm paraphrasing it, I'm not saying it correctly, but you sort of write from a bank of everything you've ever heard. And I want to harken back to something Catherine said earlier, where she said, you know, she's mostly self-taught. And I feel like good writers should say that about themselves in a sense. I did study composition for 2 summers. It was a 1-week program with Arnold Sherman, but do I consider myself to have studied composition? Well, not as a college major and not intensely. I think my greatest gains came from just doing it constantly and seeing what works and what doesn't, getting better at your notation program so things look clean on the page and so on and so forth, because all of those little things help along the way. But certainly Arnold Sherman was an inspiration to me, because he worked with us one-on-one at Concordia, and that was ever so helpful. Back when Anna Laura Page was the editor of Alfred, before she retired, I had sent some things to her, and she called me at home. And she said, now I want to tell you, I don't do this for everybody. She goes, but I really see something here in this music. And so she put her speakerphone on top of her piano, and she just gave me this half-hour tutorial on some of my music. It was just invaluable to me. And so I think some of the little, my son Mitchell is dabbling in handbell writing now, and he has a couple things published. And I said, and an editor called him and talked to him, and I said, Mitchell, take that as a good thing, because they are calling to talk to you because they find worth or value in your piece, and they wouldn't do it. They would just send it back to you otherwise. Mm-hmm. And so I found a lot of value in that. And also my years when I was an undergrad at Silver Lake, again, just working with Sister Lorna Zemke was a huge influence on my life. And she was such a good theory teacher too, that the theory base that I got there was ever so helpful. And you know, the more you study, the more you find out the depth of your ignorance, right? Because you just keep finding out what you don't know, And so the more you do it, is what Catherine was saying. You're self-taught because you just continually learn from all those mistakes. So just the idea of keeping on writing, just keep doing it. I throw a lot of things away. I save, I cut large chunks of things out. Sometimes if the inspiration bus just isn't showing up at my door when I want to write a certain part of a piece, I put it away for a day or two and go back to it, and then voila, something's there, you know. Right. So I think all of those things are helpful. So
awesome. So Catherine, how about you? What have been some great influences on you in your life as a composer?
As a general rule, actually Choral Society has been a great inspiration. I sang with Choral Society for many years, and now I write some amount of choral music. I think just understanding how different genres work, like, you know, continuing on the self-taught theme, when I was first asked to write a saxophone concerto for saxophone and band, I'd never written a band piece before. So I asked my friend Lynn Klock, who's a terrific saxophonist, to send me a few band scores so I could look at them. And my inspiration was to make my band score look like those band scores. I mean, it had nothing to do with music. It just, you know, I could see that families of instruments play together, like the winds would have a lick and then the brass have a lick, and, you know, this and that. I mean, I learned from studying others who had gone before me, and the Brahms Requiem was a great inspiration. I think Fred Grayman's music is a great inspiration. You know, he's got he's a magical way of creating, you know, sort of luminous sound within the bell choir, which I unabashedly try and copy many times. I think Matt Compton's music is inspiring. We love King's West, and we've played it many times, and it's just a butt kicker. We love it, and that kind of energy is an inspiration, and it's not that complicated a piece. I mean, you don't have to be really complicated and difficult to be wonderful and inspiring and all that kind of stuff. So I'm inspired by things that work, and I try and get at the essence of what makes it work. Why does it work? Here's another example. From many years ago, I was at U of M piano major, and I attended an afternoon piano recital of Fred Weldy. I mean, it was just, one of the showcase concerts, and about 4 or 5 pianists played. And I knew Fred. I mean, I heard him play many times, and he's playing something I can't even remember what. And I thought, why is this so good? Why is this so good? And so I listened and listened, and I realized that what made it good was he never rushed a downbeat. He never rushed an entrance. He never rushed an arrival. And I think that 10 minutes of listening to Fred play, Fred Weldy, not Fred Grayman, but another Fred, taught me more about musical playing. I mean, I had great teachers, don't get me wrong, but analyzing what works is a great inspiration, because you think, okay, it's got to be like that. And the challenge is to identify what makes it work. And I like that challenge and try and emulate those elements that make things work. I mean, like in that wonderful Fred Grayman, the change ring on Divina Mysterium, and he's got this sort of wafty opening, and I'm thinking, oh, that's cool. Okay, I'm going to start every bell piece like that, because I love that sound. And so you just, it's as Sandy says, it's a constant input of information, and just a recognition of what works well, and trying to identify those elements in a practical way that you can adapt and borrow and steal and make your own. That is my greatest inspiration, I guess, when it comes to writing of any kind. So
if I
yeah, please.
I'm going to bounce kind of off of that with what Catherine was saying of finding things that works. I will forever to this day blame Kevin McChesney's Capriccio, because it's my favorite bell piece of all time. I will forever blame that for why I have so many pieces that have a rhythmic malleted bass line, because that one just captivates my attention. And there's just certain pieces in catalogs that you're like, that one catches my attention. And Sandy, you have a couple out there, and it's like your Coventry Carol and Savor the Nations Come. They're just so well done. Dr. Benke has one of his older pieces, Le Cloche, which is the French for the bells.
Oh,
It's one of my favorite pieces, but it's so underplayed, and it makes me so upset. But Arnold Sherman's Fantasy Trilogy, there's just certain pieces and certain things that just work. And that's the way I write is I never want to have a piece go by the wayside and people go, well, that was good. And I have a couple out there that I'm like, well, that's not that great. And I try to avoid that as much as possible, because I want good repertoire out there. And so I try to emulate, like I said, Sandy or Dr. Benke or Arnold Sherman, with those solid pieces that just catch your audience or ringers or congregation or whoever. And that's what I want the bell world to turn into, and to kind of see that this is the repertoire that I think most people should be writing. And as Catherine said, it doesn't need to be the most challenging or difficult piece to be impressive and to be musically moving and inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Well, but I have to tell Matt, in a perfect world, we'd all have. I've been writing for 20 years now, for other things as well, for keyboard. But there are a good number of pieces. I look back at them now and I go, oh, I wish I could have that back. That was me in process. And I look at it now through the eyes of someone writing for 20 years, and I hope I have 20 more years to go. And I think, oh, golly, I wish I could just take that piece back and give it a facelift and redo it, because I see I did this, I should have done that, I should have filled this chord out, I shouldn't have done that. And I think we can do that all day, but I feel like sometimes then no one would write music if they were in the fear of failure, you know.
True.
And I feel like it's I see myself evolving there a little bit, and it is what it is. I can't get them back, and it's out there, but you know, I think we're going to have those moments. So don't beat yourself up on that.
Well, that actually kind of leads me into the next thought that I'd like for us to explore a little bit, which is where do you see the art of handbell ringing going in the next 5 to 10 years? And so, Sandy, since you were the last to talk and you talked about the span of the time you've been writing for handbells, where do you see the art of handbell ringing going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's helped that I've gone to a lot of the national events, and you can listen to a lot of different people who ring in different types of groups. They bring in a volunteer church group, or maybe they ring in an audition community group, or a group at a nursing home, or a children's homeschool group. And I feel like I've seen it evolve. You know, I'm trying to find the words. Like Matt said, how many amazing graces do we need out there? So I do feel like composers are seeking out more original music. They're pushing the envelope for what the instrument can do. I feel like there are more, for good, bad, or otherwise, pop tunes coming out. But then I look at somebody like Michael Joy and Nick Hansen, who work in junior high schools, and they need something to capture the attention of those students and get them hooked. And you know, and then they throw in a good piece of classical repertoire and have a lovely balance in there. So there's a lot more pop tunes coming up in our catalogs. And I feel like I'm seeing handbells just a little bit more. I'm seeing them, of course, we see them on Christmas. The Mormon Tabernacle Choir always has their PBS Christmas special. And we had at our local Appleton Performing Arts 3 years ago, my group from my church got selected to ring with the Doc Severinsen Christmas program on stage with his Christmas with the Orchestra. So just seeing them out and about, and not just for Christmas, you know, bells, they're not just for Christmas anymore. You know, maybe, you know, I feel like I've seen a lot of evolution. The one thing I remember too that Arnold Sherman said to us, he actually used that exact song, Matt, in one of our classes, and he said, really, how many Amazing Graces do we need? And at that time he was editor of Red River, and he said, but you know, if someone sends me a new arrangement of Amazing Grace, I'm going to look at it, because cream always rises to the top, he would say. So, you know, I don't know, but I do think it's evolving. And I do think, look how many octaves are available now for this instrument, even from the foundries that produce the bells within the last 50 years. And the chimes, the low bass chimes, which, you know, just melt the floor out of my sanctuary at my church. And you get the when those low bass chimes come in, you know, those are lovely. I love writing for low bass chimes. So I think, you know, we're expanding.
Yeah. Cool. What about you, Catherine? Where do you see the art of handbell ringing going in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's a multi-layered issue. And a lot of it depends on publishers. And I do not fault any publishers for publishing what they publish, because they have to make a profit.
Right.
But they are very, very cautious of any music that's at all atonal, at all out of. So I think that the future of original handbell writing is going to rest upon accessibility over the internet, because you can't print 1,000, you know, like squiggle me upside down, and, you know, I mean, you just can't do it. They can't make a profit. And much of the bell music that's available is what we call, my husband and I, he does the choir at our church, you know, happy Christian music. And a lot of bell music is happy Christian music. And I don't fault it. I mean, that's where most bell choirs are. But if you want original, challenging, new sound music, we can't depend on publishers to take us forward. And I think a lot of writers do that. I mean, we all like being published because you have a forum. I mean, you have distribution, you have visibility. That is so great. But it also tends to middle of the road us, you know.
Sure.
And I think that people have to, in order to write risky music, which is the only way any music goes forward. I mean, look at Beethoven, look at Stravinsky, look at all these people whose music was radical. People threw tomatoes, people walk out. Now it's absolutely standard repertoire and has advanced orchestral art, and it's advanced chamber art, it's advanced ballet, opera, all this stuff. But you can't depend on a marketing approach to have that happen. But on the plus side, because of the internet making PDFs available, you know, print on demand, all these things make it easier for you to take a risk with that kind of music, because you aren't going to print 1,000 of them and have them sitting in a warehouse that nobody's going to buy. It's going to take 20 years to empty that box of music. Right. So I think that when we talk about the future of handbell music, it's to some degree financial. You know, risk is never rewarded. Risk is risk of its own need to be risky. And when that music is written and played by premier groups like Raleigh Ringers, Cascade, you know, all of these great groups, it will become more and more accessible to other groups that might say, well, that was cool. It's not what we usually do, but I'm willing to try that. But, you know, there's got to be those ice cutters at the front who don't care if they make any money, and they just need to write it this way, and then the whole genre will advance. But it's going to take that kind of risk-taking, I think, to really change it much.
Can I just add something to what she said? It is just so lovely that the community groups, especially the advanced ensembles, take the time and the money, frankly, to commission writers to say, and some of them will say, just write whatever you want. You know what I mean? Yeah. You don't have to do a cookie cutter piece because the boundaries aren't there. So, you know, I would just want to applaud some of those community groups that do make the effort to do that. So. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's where all the new music is, you know, a rising tide raises all ships. And so when you have a little bit of experimental stuff, then someone might insert a little bit of experimental stuff in an otherwise fairly traditional thing, like singing bells, you know. That was like so radical and so cool. And now it's like you can throw a stick down the street and you'll hit 5 people with singing bells. But it takes somebody to kind of do it, you know, and then they say, oh, that was cool, we could do that too, you know. So but that's where it lies. The future of handbell music lies in new risky pieces, and they're risky because there's no sure payment for them. You just have to do it because you want to and hope for the best. But I'm taking up Matt's time here.
So Matt, your turn.
Well, and I was going to bounce off of that because I was just at the college ring-in, and at the college ring-in every year they do an unpublished reading session, and so we had 7 people, including myself, bring in an unpublished piece, and then we conduct it, and we have the 35 ringers, or how many of us sight read through it, and then they always bring in a couple of the handbell editors. And so this year we had Dave Weck from Hope and then Bill Griffin from Beckenhorst. And this is my first chance to meet Bill Griffin. And he was talking to me, and we were just talking about the publishing industry in general. And he just looks at me. He's like, you do know we accept easy pieces too, right? And I know he meant that in a joking way, but like he was also partly serious about that, because Bill Griffin, I think, is one of the few editors that he's very willing to take a risk on a more advanced piece. He's been like that since he was the editor of AGHR. If you look at the older AGHR catalog, there's a lot of level 4, 5, and 6 pieces. And the Beck and Horse catalog, there's more of that advanced music. But as Catherine said, it's not the fault of the publishers that they have to be careful of how many they accept, because it's like any other business. You have to market for what's going to sell. Apple's not going to start selling lawnmowers, so publishing companies, they have to be careful of how much hard music they accept. But I think one of the composers that, like, if you look at any of his pieces, Alex Gieber right now is kind of taking the charge on this experimental, quote unquote, weird, like, I don't think it's weird, but like just different from what we're used to seeing right now. And I love it. It's awesome to see. He's won 2 composition contests. He won the Bells of the Cascades contest when they were doing their 25th anniversary concert called Out of the Silent Planet, and he wrote it based off of the C.S. Lewis book. And it's weird. It sounds like space though, and he does this really cool technique. It's essentially vibrato, but he does it in time. So you do vibrato, and it starts with sextuplets, and it slows down to sixteenths, and then it slows down to triplets, but it just creates this cool effect, and he uses it throughout the piece. Bells of the Cascades and Bells of the Sound were doing joint concerts this spring, and they just had their composition contest last year called Two's Company, and he won that contest with the piece that's called Duel. And the tempo marking is, the quarter note is 208. It's ridiculously fast, and it's an incredibly challenging piece, but when we get it, it's going to be so cool. But he's like, he just has this unbelievable compositional style. It's very cinematic. I think it's very much like movie music, and which I'm drawn to that style, but it's very new, it's very unique, and it's very cool to see. And so with me, I'm trying to find that balance also of how can I fit into that unique style of writing, and where is it going to go? And I would love to see more composers like Alex coming up in the next 5 to 10 years and see where that goes. But with handbell ringing in general, it's interesting to think about it, because some people want to try all these avant-garde ideas with bells, but sometimes it just doesn't work, because bells are what they are. Like, you can only do so much with them. Kevin jokes, and he's like, I mean, with bells, we're just 100 shades of white. And we have all these techniques, but we're not like an orchestra where you have all these different sounds that you can, in combinations. And so I think in some ways, bells are limited to where we are. And it's one of those where, or the most we can do right now, I think, is just keep encouraging people to focus on like youth, get youth involved to it. And people go, well, how do we get more youth involved in bells? Well, a lot of times it's word of mouth, getting them involved into it, getting their friends to come to it. I just started this children's handbell program at my church last spring. No, it was the fall. We just started it this fall. And I have 10 kids, and 6 of them don't go to our church. And so it's one of those where it's the word of mouth and giving younger people a chance to be more involved in the bell world on higher levels, but just allowing bell ringing to also just create more of a community. Because one of the greatest debates, Showmark or Mallmark, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you're ringing, just get people ringing. And creating less conflict between people that are like, this is the right thing or this is the right thing. And we have to create more of a community and find ways to be willing to try new ideas that maybe we wouldn't consider, because otherwise our instrument won't continue in 10 years or however long. I don't think the instrument's ever going to die, obviously, but we have to find ways to be willing to look at these newer ideas, both compositionally, ringing styles, and different things, and find ways to really see if there's ways we can propel from what we already have, because we have to consider what we already have isn't bad. the composers that and conductors we have aren't bad. The music we have isn't bad. We just need to find ways to propel what's great and develop that further, and then continue and see how can we tutor people to help, because we have some amazing conductors as well, like Fred Grayman, Kevin McChesney, Jason Wells. Get them teaching other people, and the more we can steamroll what's good and make it great, that's really what's going to keep bell ringing going and growing as time goes on.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing. I ask all of my guests at the end of every interview to share with us some words of wisdom, the best piece of advice you were ever given. And it can be something that's serious or something that's funny. It can be something that's related to what we're talking about today, or it can be something that is completely off the wall. So I'm going to start with Sandy. Would you give us some words of wisdom?
I think my best words of wisdom did come from Arnold Sherman, and it's so simple and cliche, but he would say, write every day, no matter how short or how long of a time period you do it, you should write every day. And the second thing, I'll never forget him telling us this in class, because it's philosophical and funny at the same time. But he would say, do you know that the first 7 notes of Rock of Ages Cleft for Me are identical to the first 7 notes in Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? So when you think about that, it's boundless what you can do, right, with music, because how different can 2 pieces be? But yet we use the first same 7 notes. And some days if you just feel, well, there's just nothing left to write, and then you think, no, those 7 notes have done so much. And so I always took that with me as being just tremendously philosophical and funny at the same time. So, but write every day. Write every day.
Oh my gosh. Catherine, what was the piece that you had messaged me about, the piano piece? Was it Chopsticks?
Freezing Hot?
No, it was
Ultimate Chopsticks.
Ultimate Chopsticks. Yes, this is a complete and total squirrel moment, but go to YouTube and Google Catherine's Ultimate Chopsticks and listen to the amazing things she does with various sounds and settings of familiar tunes. It plays right off of what Sandy was saying about Rock of Ages and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. That's cool. Well, Catherine, what are some words of wisdom that you can share with us?
Well, mine are not music related. My mom has been a wonderful and benevolent influence in my life. So is my dad, but my mom claims not to be a philosopher, but she is. And 2 things. One was, when I was raising my kids, she said, I tried to say yes as much as I could, and when I said no, I meant it. That's been a guiding force. And the other thing that she said, now that she's 87, almost 88, we've done a little bit of traveling together. And I had proposed a trip to her, but we had just gone to Russia, and this trip was like coming up. And I said, well, maybe a year from now. She said, I'm healthy now, let's go. And that has become my mantra. I'm healthy now, let's go. And that applies to many things, not just travel. I mean, it applies to just about everything that you want to add to enrich your life. So that's what I have to offer.
Beautiful. Well, we'll end with you, Matt. What are some words of wisdom that you can share with us?
Mine also isn't music related, but I used to work for Cutco, and I used to sell Cutco cutlery. And that was the summer between my freshman and sophomore year of college. And it was initially just like, I need some money for the summer job. And it wound up being the best summer job I have ever had. And so I have two advice things. And the one from the Cutco one was, is complacency is the enemy of consistency. And that has stuck with me forever. And it's in some ways so true, just to see with everything, is because as in the Cutco business, it was, once you sell a big set of knives, you can't just stop there. You have to keep going, and you can't just get complacent and be like, well, I sold one set, that's good enough. But I think that applies to anything, is that if you get in such a routine of, well, this is good enough, you're not going to be consistently growing, because I personally believe that as a person, no matter who it is, you should always be going to get the best version of yourself and always improving and striving towards a goal, because a lot of times people are not goal oriented. And so I think that you have to have consistency in wanting to get better at, no matter what it is, at something, and finding something. Because if you get complacent with it and you're fine with where you are, you don't get anywhere. And then the other philosophy and kind of advice that I have stood by is, not every day is a good day, but there's always good in every day.
Mm.
And I think that's incredibly important to keep in mind, because there are many times where you'll come home from work and it was just a bad day, but you can always find something good. Like, you had a nice conversation with someone at work, you had a good lunch, you're breathing, just something simple. Like, and so I try to live my life as a very positive person. I keep that in mind, and the very, very forefront of my mind is that even if I have a bad day, there's always going to be something that good comes from it in some way, even if it's just something simple.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to my panel of esteemed colleagues who have shared with us today. I thank you so much for your excellent insights, your interesting stories, and inspiring comments and quotes for us. I thank you for watching this video. If you liked the content that we shared with you today, give it the thumbs up. That helps me out as a dude who has got a show on YouTube. It gets a little more visibility. If you like the videos you're seeing on this channel, hit the subscribe button. That also lets you know when I put something out. Make sure to check your YouTube every Friday for Friday Finds, which is this show, where we talk about things that I use in my practice or I use in my career as a musician that I find a lot of value in, that I think are important to share with you. And so I want to say thanks again to my guests. And if you're watching on Friday, have an excellent weekend. If you are watching on another day, have a great week. Thanks again to my guests, and have a great day or weekend. We'll see you all later. Bye-bye.
Join me next week as we learn about the benefits of Himalayan salt with Charisse Higgins of We Got Salt.